She stopped to save a stranger, and thought her future vanished forever. But across the city, one quiet act echoed loud enough to reach a legend. When Big Shaq reads her story, a door opens, not back into the world she lost, but into a world she never imagined. Now eyes are watching, and not all of them are kind. What if missing the biggest moment of her life was the exact thing that made her unforgettable? This is not a story about luck. It's a story about legacy, and the woman who built her own. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Atlanta stirred beneath a pale peach sky, its skyline yawning to the rhythm of early buses and half-lit storefronts. The streets still glistened from a night of soft rain, the concrete breathing steam as the sun cracked over the rooftops. It was the kind of morning that held its breath quiet, suspended like it knew someone's life was about to shift, but didn't want to give it away just yet. Inside a narrow brick duplex tucked off Josephine Boone Boulevard, a small alarm buzzed without apology. Kendra Hollis reached for it blindly, eyes still half closed. She silenced it, then sat up with a slow breath, steadying herself like she did every morning between sleep and survival. At 25, Kendra had mastered the art of movement with purpose. Every second of her morning was accounted for. No wasted motion, no distraction. She showered quickly, slipped into her carefully chosen outfit, charcoal slacks, a plum blouse, low-heeled shoes that said "Hire me," without screaming, and tied her hair into a neat bun. The blouse had a slight snag near the hem, but it was ironed and clean, and that was enough. Today wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. In the kitchen, her grandmother, Mama Joyce, stirred oatmeal over the stove, with one hand while sorting mail with the other. She was in her late 60s, but moved with the rhythm of someone who'd raised 3 children and a grandchild without waiting for applause. "Coffee's hot, oatmeal's ready," she said, not looking up. "You got your folder?" Kendra grabbed the folder from the couch, her resume, letters of reference, and the design pitch she'd spent 3 months refining. "Got it." Mama Joyce turned and offered a rare, soft smile. "Then go show them what Hollis women are made of." Kendra smiled, kissed her cheek, and headed out, oatmeal forgotten. Her nerves were too alive to eat. Outside, the city hummed like a machine warming up. Traffic pulsed on the edges, horns soft and rhythmic, as if the city itself had its own heartbeat. She walked briskly to the corner bus stop, cutting through the damp air with focused urgency. As she waited, she slid in one earbud and opened her favorite podcast, Forward Motion. Today's guest, Shaquille O'Neal. Her phone screen displayed the title From Courtside to Boardroom, Big Shaq on Legacy and Leadership. His voice filtered through her ears, deep and grounded. People think power is loud, but the ones who really move the world, they move quiet. They move with intention. They show up where they're not expected and make space for the ones coming next. Kendra's lips curved into a private smile. She wasn't one for sports, but Big Shaq had always felt like more than a name, more than a brand. Something about his steadiness, his integrity, it made her feel less alone in rooms where she was often the only one who looked like her, the only one whose resume was weighed alongside her zip code. The bus pulled up, brakes sighing. She climbed on and took a window seat halfway back. Outside, Atlanta moved in blur. Mothers dragging sleepy kids to daycare, sanitation trucks groaning through alleys, cyclists weaving between pickups. Her thoughts narrowed around one thing: the interview. She had made it through 3 rounds already. Today was the final pitch, the client-facing simulation. If she nailed it, she'd land a full-time role with Wade and Howell, a boutique marketing firm with national clients and a reputation for diversity that seemed more than just a tagline. She imagined the moment, standing in that glossy office space, her name on an office door, her grandmother not having to stretch pension checks between groceries and medication. She imagined finally arriving. The bus jerked slightly as it turned onto Spring Street. She checked her watch. 8:11 a.m. Plenty of time. Then she saw it. On the far end of the sidewalk, just beyond the gas station, a woman, maybe late 40s, staggered forward before dropping hard to the pavement. One moment upright, the next folded like a marionette with its strings cut. People walked past. A man in a hoodie glanced, then turned away. A woman with a stroller gave a wide berth. No one stopped. Kendra felt her stomach twist. This wasn't the first time she'd seen something like this in the city. People collapsed from heat, hunger, addiction. The city moved on. The bus rolled to the next stop, half a block from the woman's body. Kendra stood. She hesitated. Her interview. Her future. She looked back at the woman again, still unmoving. A plastic bag clutched in one hand, purse spilled beside her, no sign of consciousness. Kendra hit the stop request, exhaled hard, and stepped off the bus. She jogged to the woman kneeling beside her. "Ma'am, you all right?" No response. She checked her pulse, faint but present. She pulled out her phone and called 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's a woman down. I think she collapsed, Spring and 4th, near the Shell station." She gave the details, then stayed by the woman's side. 10 minutes passed, then 12. Sirens approached. As paramedics loaded the woman into the ambulance, one of them, a tall EMT with soft eyes, nodded toward Kendra. "You the one who called?" "Yeah," Kendra said quietly. "You probably saved her life." She nodded, breath caught somewhere between relief and panic. She checked the time. 8:44 a.m. She was supposed to check in for her interview at 8:50. Downtown was still 10 minutes away without traffic. She tried calling, left a message, ran part of the way, hopped on another bus, arrived at the office, heart hammering. The receptionist looked up, apologetic. "They just wrapped up. You were scheduled for 8:50, but they're already on to the next slot." "I know." Kendra hesitated. There was a woman who needed help. The receptionist offered a sympathetic smile, but it didn't change the outcome. "I'm so sorry." Kendra stepped back outside, chest tight. The city no longer shimmered. It loomed, like a door that had opened wide just to slam shut. She sat on a bench and stared at the folder in her hands. Her future, neatly collated, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the ache of having done the right thing, and still losing. The voice of Big Shaq echoed in her ear again, still faint in the paused podcast app. "Legacy ain't about who claps for you. It's about who stands because of you." She closed her eyes and whispered to no one. "Then why does it feel like I just fell backward?" Above her, the sun climbed higher, chasing the remnants of last night's rain from the pavement. But inside Kendra, the weight of the morning refused to lift. She had chosen compassion and lost what she thought was her one shot. What she didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that someone else had seen, and that this day, despite how it felt, was the beginning of something far bigger than any job title. Because the right people weren't always sitting behind desks. Sometimes they were just watching quietly from the edge of the story, waiting for a reason to call. The city had shifted. The light was harsher now, the air drier. Kendra's shoes clicked fast on the concrete as she moved with practiced urgency, weaving through pockets of sidewalk traffic, her mind locked on the numbers flashing across her phone. 8th, her interview at Wade and Howell was in less than 20 minutes. She could still make it if the lights stayed green, and the universe stayed quiet. But the universe rarely stays quiet when you need it to. Kendra had barely made it a block past the Spring Street intersection when she saw the woman again, the one who had crumpled earlier. Except this time, there was no question about what had happened. The woman was still there, folded near the concrete bench just outside a rundown convenience store, slumped against a metal trash can like her body had given up halfway through something important. Her arms hung loose. A plastic grocery bag had split, its contents strewn. A few oranges, a prescription bottle, a bruised sandwich in a cling-wrapped corner. And people were walking around her like she was a broken signpost. Kendra's heart caught. 2 men exited the store, laughing over a phone screen, stepping around the woman like she wasn't real. A jogger veered into the bike lane to avoid her entirely. Kendra's pace slowed. Her brain screamed to keep moving. You cannot miss this interview. But something in her chest had already locked into place. She stopped, pivoted, jogged the short distance back to the woman and crouched. "Ma'am?" she asked softly, placing a hand just above the woman's elbow. "Can you hear me?" No response. The woman's lips were parted, her skin ashen. One shoe had come off. There was a faint pulse when Kendra pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, but it was weak, unsteady. She yanked her phone from her coat pocket and dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's a woman down," Kendra said, her voice steady but tight. "I don't think she's conscious." Spring and 4th, just past the Shell gas station. Middle-aged black woman, probably late 40s. She's not bleeding, but she's not responding either. "Is she breathing?" "Yes. Barely." "Stay with her. Paramedics are on the way." Kendra set the phone to speaker and placed it on the concrete. She gently adjusted the woman's position, pulling her coat off and folding it behind the woman's head. "Ma'am, I'm here. Okay? You're not alone." The minutes crawled, and as they did, so did her sense of panic. Not for the woman, who was finally groaning softly, but for herself. Her window was closing. The interview, the culmination of months of preparation, internship, rejection, and persistence, all of it was slipping. She could feel it, like watching water run through a crack in your hand. The paramedics arrived at 8:50 sharp. Kendra stood and waved them down, then stepped back as they kneeled beside the woman, checking her vitals, calling out numbers and codes she didn't understand. "She probably hasn't eaten or had water in a day," one of them muttered. They loaded her onto the stretcher. One paramedic, a woman with short, silver-streaked hair and piercing brown eyes, turned to Kendra. "You were the one who called." Kendra nodded. "You saved her," the medic said. "We've seen people step over bodies. You stayed." Kendra opened her mouth to say something but couldn't. She just nodded again. When they drove off, sirens fading into city static, Kendra looked down at her hands, one still gripping her portfolio, the other trembling. She checked the time again, 9:04 a.m. The building was only a few blocks away. She started running, skirt clinging, hair unraveling, portfolio pressed to her chest. She pushed through the streets like someone trying to rewind time by sheer will. Her lungs burned. Her calves screamed. When she reached the front desk of Wade and Howell's glass-walled high-rise, she could hardly speak. I had an 8:50 interview," she said, gasping. Kendra Hollis, the receptionist, a poised woman in a navy pantsuit, offered a thin-lipped apology before gently gesturing toward the elevator bank. "I'm sorry, they've already moved to the final candidate. The partners have another meeting at 9. Kendra nodded, trying to catch her breath, trying not to cry. "I tried. Her voice cracked. "I understand," the receptionist said, her expression softening just enough to register empathy. "I can let them know you arrived. But they're already with someone." Kendra walked out slowly, her heels silent now against the marble floor. Outside, the city's volume had increased. Engines idling, crosswalks blinking, the growl of a jackhammer somewhere in the distance. She sat down on a cold steel bench outside a nearby fountain, her body still in motion even though her day had stopped moving entirely. Her phone buzzed. A missed call. The internship coordinator at Wade and Howell. She knew that call. She didn't need to hear the voicemail to know what it would say. She stared at the fountain's surface, eyes unfocused, until the reflection blurred. Her folder slid from her lap. A wind gust flipped it open, scattering one of the pages across the concrete. She didn't chase it. Instead, she leaned forward, elbows on knees, and allowed herself one slow, careful breath. Then another. She had made the choice. No one forced her. She could have walked away. She could have left that woman there, and made it just in time to pitch herself in a corner office, where they sipped sparkling water and quoted brand metrics. But she didn't. She chose someone who couldn't choose for herself in that moment. And now it felt like the world had slammed the door in her face just for trying to be decent. She started walking, not toward home exactly. She wasn't sure she had the energy to go back and see Mama Joyce's proud face fall when she told her what happened, but away. She needed to move, to put distance between herself and the space where her future had evaporated in real time. Every block she walked, she felt the weight of her choice settle heavier in her chest. Was this the cost of doing right? That you get left behind? Near Centennial Park, she stopped at a food truck and bought a bottle of water with her last few dollars. Her fingers trembled as she opened the cap. A young boy walked by with his mother, asking loudly for ice cream, and something about the innocence in his voice made Kendra's eyes sting again. She sat under a tree and pulled out her phone. Opened the podcast again. Big Shaq's voice picked up right where she'd left it. "You don't become who you're meant to be by choosing comfort. Sometimes your breakthrough shows up dressed like a setback." She let it play through twice. Then again, the words didn't fix it. They didn't bring back her opportunity, but they helped her sit up a little straighter. Still, a question gnawed at the edge of her thoughts. What if that was the only chance she'd ever get? She didn't know that across town, a private call had just taken place in the back seat of a blacked-out SUV. That someone who heard about a woman stopping everything to help a stranger was asking his assistant to find out who she was. That her day, the one she thought had broken her, was about to become the day that built her name into something far bigger than a resume line. But for now, all Kendra had was the ache in her chest, the sweat drying on her neck, and the knowledge that she did the right thing, even if it cost her everything. The apartment was quiet when Kendra stepped inside, the heavy door clicking shut behind her like the punctuation on a sentence she didn't want to read. Atlanta's light streamed in through the gauzy kitchen curtains, bright but not warm. Dust floated in the air. The smell of lavender and old hardwood filled the space, a scent that usually comforted her, but today felt too gentle for the ache in her chest. Mama Joyce was at the table, folding laundry with methodical grace, humming something gospel and old. She looked up as Kendra set her bag down, her eyes reading her granddaughter's posture long before Kendra said a word. "Didn't go how you hoped, huh?" she asked, not unkindly. Her voice was steady, soft as a worn quilt. Kendra sat across from her and didn't speak for a full minute. She stared at the edges of the laundry, perfectly folded t-shirts, socks rolled into tight cotton balls. Her own voice, when it finally came, was low and brittle. "I missed it, Mama. I was 5 minutes late, and they'd already closed the door. They didn't even look at my portfolio." Joyce paused her folding, hands resting on a faded sweatshirt. "But you helped someone, didn't you?" Kendra looked up, eyes stinging. "Yeah." She collapsed outside the bus stop. "I stayed with her until the ambulance came. And if you hadn't, she might have died," Kendra whispered, voice cracking. Joyce nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Then what you gave up wasn't a loss. It was a trade." Kendra leaned back in her chair, frustrated. "It doesn't feel noble. It feels like the world doesn't care. I did the right thing, and now I'm back at zero. No job, no leads, just a good deed that won't pay rent." Joyce stood up, crossed the small space, and placed her hands on Kendra's shoulders. Her voice dropped to that rhythm she used when truth needed to land. "You didn't lose, baby. You just proved you're the kind of person the world tries to overlook, but needs the most." Kendra closed her eyes. She wanted to believe her grandmother. But belief couldn't refill a savings account. It couldn't open doors already closed. Later that evening, after she had made tea and watched Joyce drift into her usual nap in the recliner, Kendra opened her laptop and logged into a private forum she had joined months ago. Clarity Rising, a digital space for women in business and leadership. It wasn't a flashy site, just a stripped-down interface. Long posts, deep conversations, a place where people dropped their masks and told the truth. She clicked into the writing section, hovered over the new post button for a long while. Then, fingers hesitant at first, she began to title "When Doing the Right Thing Costs You the Thing You Worked For."
"I'm not here to vent. I just need to process what happened today, and maybe someone here will understand what it feels like to choose your integrity over your opportunity and wonder if you chose wrong."
I had an interview this morning. The one I've been preparing for since last year. Full-time position at one of Atlanta's top marketing firms. I had everything ready. My pitch, my work, my suit, my shot. But on my way there, I saw a woman, maybe in her 40s, collapsed outside a bus stop. Nobody stopped. I don't even think they saw her. I did. I stayed. I waited with her. Called 911. Watched her struggle to say her name. By the time the EMTs arrived, I was too late for the interview. They told me the room had moved on. The door was closed, and I walked home feeling like I traded my future for someone else's present. I don't regret helping her, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't wreck me a little. I guess I'm writing this because it's easy to believe that kindness is invisible, that it doesn't pay off, that it makes you naive, but part of me wants to believe it matters, that the world notices, even when it doesn't say so. She hit post and shut the laptop. She didn't expect a flood of replies. The forum wasn't built for virality. It was for reflection. Private. Anonymous. Safe. So when she opened it the next morning and saw nearly 100 responses, comments, messages, affirmations, her first reaction was confusion, then disbelief. Some messages were simple. "Thank you for sharing this. I've been there." Others were emotional. "I needed this reminder today." I was starting to think compassion was weakness. But one reply stood out, wedged halfway down the thread. The name wasn't familiar. The profile picture just a grayscale mountain range. You never know who's watching or listening. Doors don't always open the way you planned. Sometimes they swing wider because you chose to stand still when others walked past. Kendra reread the message 3 times. It didn't say much, but it felt precise, intentional. Like someone had written it knowing she'd be looking for something more than comfort, something like direction. She clicked the profile, No details, no other posts, just that single response. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the forum moderator. Congrats. Your post has been spotlighted as one of our most resonant stories this month. You've sparked a dialogue that's crossing platforms. Check your inbox. We've sent something you'll want to see. Heart beating faster. Kendra clicked into her messages. There it was. A forwarded email from the moderator. Subject line. Shared by a reader. Must see. It was a screenshot of her post, reshared on an internal Slack channel, tagged with the name of a major media outlet, and another forwarded to a public speaking agency with the caption, "This voice matters." Kendra sat up straighter. She didn't understand exactly what was happening yet. But something had shifted. Her words, written in quiet disappointment, had found an echo, and it was growing louder. In the following hours, more comments trickled in. One from a woman who had left a toxic executive role and found clarity in Kendra's post. Another from a professor who wanted to use the story in her ethics class. Even a message from someone claiming to work for a cultural strategist tied to major philanthropic initiatives. That message ended with a single question. Can we talk? She didn't respond. Not yet. It still felt unreal. Mama Joyce watched her from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp as ever. "You're sitting like someone who just heard thunder but ain't seen lightning yet," she said. Kendra looked up, startled. "I don't know what it is yet," she said honestly, "but something's coming." Joyce nodded slowly.
You did the right thing, Kendra. Maybe now the world's finally gonna see what kind of woman does that.
Kendra thought back to the stranger at the bus stop. She hadn't even gotten the woman's name, but maybe it didn't matter, because the moment itself had already carved something into her, and apparently, into others too. She looked again at the comment from the Grayscale Mountain profile. You never know who's watching, or listening. A chill ran down her spine, not out of fear, out of knowing. Something, or someone, was watching this unfold. And she was no longer just the girl who missed an interview. She was becoming the woman who made people look again. The corner office of Apex Core Technologies sat on the 41st floor of a high-rise in downtown Atlanta. The room buzzed with innovation. Glass boards scrawled with equations, prototype devices resting on matte black pedestals, and executives volleying phrases like scalability and ethical AI infrastructure. At the head of the table, a presence far more grounded than the rest leaned back slightly in a custom-built chair. Shaquille O'Neal, known in most circles simply as Big Shaq, was technically there for a board advisory session. He had been a silent partner in Apex Core for 3 years, drawn in by their efforts to bridge digital access to underserved communities. His role wasn't just funding, it was perspective, cultural insight, gravitas. But today something was off. His gaze drifted often to his phone, tapping the screen as if searching for something more important than projections and pitch decks. "Shaq," said Amari, the lead CTO, her tone gentle but trying to re-anchor him to the conversation. "Do you think the digital literacy rollout we proposed fits into the school initiatives you're backing in DeKalb?" Shaq looked up slowly. His voice was calm, thoughtful, but distant. "It could, if it's not just tech for tech's sake. If it's story-driven. They gotta see themselves in the tools." The team nodded, satisfied with his input. But his mind had already returned to the notification that had just buzzed again. It was a direct message from Trent, an old friend from his college days, now a venture consultant, who had a talent for spotting cultural undercurrents before they exploded. The message contained just 2 words and a link. "Read this." Shaq tapped the link. Up popped a screenshot of a story from a private business forum. The interface was minimal, the username obscured, but the story stopped him cold. "I had an interview this morning. The one I've been preparing for since last year. But on my way there, I saw a woman, maybe in her 40s, collapsed outside a bus stop. Nobody stopped. I did. By the time the EMTs arrived, I was too late for the interview. I don't regret helping her, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't wreck me a little." Shaq didn't blink as he read. He leaned forward slightly, the boardroom's hum fading behind him like static. He read the post again, slower this time. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't crafted for sympathy. They carried something else entirely. Clarity. Stillness. The kind of truth that didn't ask for applause. He clicked into the follow-up thread. Saw the flood of responses. Encouragement. Reflection. And one comment that chilled him. "You never know who's watching. Or listening." Shaq turned his phone over in his palm. Sat in silence for a moment. Then, with the ease of practiced discretion, He turned to his assistant. Nia seated 2 chairs down and tilted his screen toward her. Find out who she is, he said, low but firm. Quietly. Nia didn't ask why. She didn't need to. As the meeting wrapped, Shaq excused himself early, citing another engagement. But the engagement wasn't external. It was internal. He rode the elevator down 40 floors without saying a word, eyes fixed on the city skyline, his thoughts tracing back not just to the post, but to a memory he hadn't visited in years. He was 12. Back in Newark. His mother, Lucille, had just come off a double shift at the medical center. They were walking home when a man, elderly, shaking, dropped a bag of groceries on the sidewalk. Cars honked. People stared. No one helped. Lucille walked over without hesitation, gathered the man's things, and walked with him 2 blocks to his building. When she came back, Shaq, still a boy, still learning the mechanics of dignity, had asked, "Mama, what if we'd been late? What if someone was waiting on us?" Lucille had looked at him with eyes sharper than her voice. "Then they'd wait, 'cause who you show up for matters more than where you show up." Those words echoed now, decades later, in his chest. Kendra, he didn't know her yet, had chosen to show up, and she had lost something tangible in the process. But what she kept, that's what stuck with him. Not everyone would see the value in what she did, but he did. Back in his private car, he opened the post again, this time scrolling through the comments more carefully. Among them were quiet endorsements from strangers, but also names he recognized. A venture philanthropist he'd partnered with last year, a former White House diversity strategist, even a film producer he'd once shared a panel with. They weren't just reading, they were paying attention. He turned to Nia, who was typing quickly beside him. "She's off the grid in a good way," she said. "No self-promotion, just a few public-facing design portfolios. But her name's Kendra Hollis. 25, Southside ATL. Caregiver for her grandmother. Degree from Emory. Lot of freelance work. Clean rep." Shaq nodded, digesting that. "What about her job interview?" Mid-tier marketing firm downtown. Very corporate. Not exactly known for nuance. They closed the room at 8:30 sharp. No second chances. He shook his head slightly. They just missed out on someone rare. Then he tapped his phone and pulled up a blank note, typed a sentence, deleted it, then typed again. "Character is what you do when no one's recording." He stared at it, then saved it. Then, for the first time in months, posted something to his personal network. No name, no photo, just a quote and a link to the original story. It was seen by 4.6 million people in the next hour. He leaned back in his seat as Atlanta rolled past the window. Streets full of people moving fast, chasing things, missing things. And somewhere in all of that noise, a woman named Kendra Hollis had done something invisible that the world was now struggling to ignore. Shaq didn't want to make her a spectacle, but he knew what it was like to be seen late, to have your value recognized only after you've already paid the price. He wouldn't let her stay invisible. Not this time. Not to him. It was a Thursday afternoon, one of those unusually warm days in early spring, when the wind feels like a trick, soft against the skin, but hiding something in its folds. Kendra Hollis stood behind the counter at Baker & Crumb, a small cafe tucked just off Auburn Avenue. It wasn't where she wanted to be, not permanently, but it was work, and work meant keeping the lights on for her and Mama Jo. She was frosting a tray of lemon cakes when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Unknown number. She ignored it. Probably another scammer, or worse, another agency politely telling her they'd move forward with other candidates. She kept working. Then came the voicemail. She wiped her hands and stepped into the back hallway near the staff lockers. A faint buzz of machines hummed in the background as she pressed the voicemail icon. Hey, Kendra. This is Shaquille O'Neal. Hope I got the right number. I read your post. It stayed with me. Mind if we talk for a second?" She blinked, replayed it, laughed once, out loud. This had to be a prank. She played it again, this time slower, leaning into the cadence of the voice. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't scripted. It sounded real. Still, she shook her head and slid the phone back into her pocket. Nah, no way. Probably someone from the cafe joking around. Maybe Deshaun from the sandwich line. He did impressions sometimes. She wasn't in the mood. The next few hours passed in a blur of orders. Burnt muffins, spilled syrup, and a tourist who insisted her almond milk latte tasted too nutty. By closing time, Kendra was bone-tired, Her shoes pinched, and the city felt too loud, too bright, too much. She walked out the back door and into the alley that cut through to the train. That's when she saw it. A black SUV, idling by the curb. Clean, tinted. Not the kind that blended in. As she passed, the passenger side door opened. A man in a slim, dark jacket stepped out. He was maybe in his mid-40s. Trim beard, calm posture. Not threatening, but formal. Too formal for this street.
Kendra Hollis? He asked, voice even.
She froze mid-step. Who's asking? He smiled. Soft but not invasive. I represent someone who asked me to reach out. He saw what you did. The post. The woman you helped. I'm sorry. I don't do rides with strangers. She said quickly, stepping back slightly. Understandable. He replied, nodding. You don't have to come with us. But he pulled something from his coat pocket, sealed in a matte black envelope. He asked me to give you this. She didn't reach for it. Who is he? The man didn't blink. Someone who believes your story deserves more than just a comment thread. Still, she didn't move. I'm not signing anything. Not giving my info. And I'm not some charity case. Noted, he said, gently placing the envelope on the sidewalk ledge near the bakery dumpster. We're not here to take anything. Just offer something. And then, just as calmly as he'd come, he stepped back into the SUV. The door closed. The engine hummed, and the car eased off into traffic, disappearing into the early evening shadows. Kendra stood still for a long moment. Her hands slightly shook, not from fear, but confusion, curiosity. A voice inside told her to ignore it. Keep walking. Go home. Another voice, quieter but sharper, whispered. Not everyone gets called. Not like this. She stepped over and picked up the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. Inside was a thick, cream-colored card, with a single line printed in small, sharp type. You helped someone who could give you nothing. We'd like to do the same. Below it, an invitation. Private brunch. Sunday. Location withheld until confirmation. Dress code. Come as you are. Hosted by a mentor who saw your heart.
No branding. No logos. Just that one line echoing in her head.
A mentor who saw your heart. She clutched the card for a second, then slid it back inside the envelope. Her thoughts tumbled as she boarded the train that night, the city flickering past the window in streaks of amber and blue. Who would go to this kind of trouble? And why? By the time she reached home, Mama Joyce was asleep in her chair, the television humming low with reruns. Kendra didn't wake her. She walked quietly to her room, sat on the bed, and pulled out the envelope again. This time she didn't read it. She just stared at it. Something had shifted. She could feel it. A line had been crossed. A door cracked open, and waiting behind it. Something she couldn't yet name. Kendra Hollis stepped out of the town car into a quiet Atlanta morning, brushed in spring sunlight. The address on the envelope had led her to a secluded hilltop venue. A renovated Art Deco mansion known to locals as the Viridian House. The kind of place you only saw on glossy magazine pages. Its wide arched doors were open just enough to let the soft jazz drift out onto the marble steps. She paused, heels trembling slightly against the polished stone, heart echoing in her chest. This wasn't just out of her tax bracket. It was out of her whole reality. She took a deep breath and stepped in. The foyer was soaked in natural light from the vaulted glass ceiling. Women in tailored suits and power dresses mingled beneath gold chandeliers, speaking in confident tones, laughter flowing like champagne from the trays that floated past. Kendra's satin blouse, freshly ironed and worn with care, felt suddenly plain among the couture. But she reminded herself of her grandmother's words that morning, before she left. Don't you shrink, baby. A good tree don't apologize for the shade it gives. A steward approached with a polite nod, gesturing her toward the garden atrium. Miss Hollis, you're expected inside. Kendra followed him, her shoes clicking softly across mosaic tiles. With every step, she grew more aware of the unfamiliar glances. Some curious, some indifferent, none cruel, just unaware. She was the variable in a room where everyone else seemed already solved. Then she saw him, seated calmly at the head of the long curved table, under a blossoming pergola, was Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq himself. No fanfare, no entourage, just present, towering in size. Yes, but sitting there with his hands folded loosely in his lap, Shaq looked more like a professor in reflection than a celebrity. He looked up and smiled gently, not the kind of smile meant to disarm, but one that welcomed without effort. Kendra's steps slowed. One of the organizers, a poised woman with silver braids and a voice like velvet, announced, "Everyone, please find your seats. Our honored guest has arrived." Whispers fluttered. Kendra felt the weight of attention press against her. But as she walked to the seat they had clearly reserved for her, directly across from Shaq, he gave her a slight nod that said, "You're not an outsider here. You're the reason we're gathered." The brunch unfolded like no meeting she'd ever imagined. These weren't just high-powered women. They were architects of change, venture capitalists, nonprofit leaders, film producers, biotech pioneers. And here she was, a woman who'd missed a job interview, sitting among them, as if she'd always belonged. The food came in courses she couldn't pronounce, served by people who wore tuxedos as uniforms. Still, Kendra barely noticed the delicacies. Her eyes kept drifting toward Shaq, who said little, watched everything, and waited. When dessert arrived, small discs of lemon custard on ceramic slates, Shaq rose. He didn't tap a glass or ask for silence. He just stood, and the room yielded to him naturally. He looked around, then to Kendra. "There's a quote I remember from my mother," she said. "You know who a person really is when they think no one's looking." The air settled. He continued. "A lot of people talk about leadership. They say it's about charisma, about control, about speaking first or speaking loud. But leadership isn't who gets handed the mic. It's who holds the line when nobody's looking." He turned fully to Kendra. Ms. Hollis didn't know anyone was watching. She didn't do what she did for likes or retweets. She did it because her heart didn't leave room for anything else. And because of that, he paused, and the slightest shift moved across his face. Something weightier than pride. A quiet grief. Because of that, someone in my family was seen. Really seen. For the first time in a long while. Kendra sat frozen. Shaq turned toward the garden doors, then raised his hand. A soft gesture. From the back patio, a woman stepped in. Thin, sun-weathered, with deep creases around her eyes and a nervous energy in her step. She wore a simple dress and a pair of old sneakers. The room quieted, breaths held. Shaq looked to the woman and spoke softly. "Denise, come on." She nodded, walking slowly toward him. Her eyes found Kendra's, and something flickered there. Recognition. Kendra stood. "You," Kendra said quietly. Denise smiled faintly. "I didn't know who you were. I just remember you sat down beside me like I was worth something. Like I mattered." Shaq turned to the room again.
This is Denise. She's my cousin. We were close once, when we were kids. But life has a way of bending people out of reach. She went off-grid years ago. Family tried to find her. But pride runs deep, especially when you feel like you've fallen below what your name is supposed to mean.
Denise spoke now, voice rough but steady. "I didn't want to be found, until someone reminded me I wasn't lost." She looked to Kendra. "You did that. You saw me. You stayed." A hush settled again, not somber, sacred. Shaq placed a hand on Denise's shoulder. This wasn't just a moment of kindness. It was a moment that repaired something broken. That's what legacy is. Not the deals you make, the people you bring back together. He looked back to Kendra. "You didn't just earn this seat today, Kendra. You built it." Applause didn't follow immediately. It didn't need to. What filled the room was heavier than claps. It was respect, the kind that didn't have to be announced. As the brunch resumed, people began approaching Kendra, some to thank her, others to connect. Investors who had read her post and were now interested in the ideas she had tucked away for someday. Executives who saw her not as the girl who missed an interview, but the woman who rewrote the moment. By the time she stepped back out into the sunlight, Kendra wasn't just changed. She was chosen. And she didn't feel like she'd stumbled into the room anymore. She had walked in, earned it, and stood her ground in it. Not because the doors opened, but because when they were closed for someone else, she had paused to knock. The morning after the brunch, Kendra sat in the corner of a minimalist office space, on the 32nd floor of a midtown Atlanta building. The view stretched for miles, glass and steel shimmering beneath the rising sun. But she wasn't looking outside. She was watching the silence between herself and the man across the room. Shaquille O'Neal. He leaned forward in his chair, arms resting across his thighs, expression open but direct. This wasn't the big Shaq from TV commercials or basketball lore. This was the quiet architect of rooms most people never knew existed. "I'm not offering you a handout, Kendra," he said. "I'm offering you a seat at a table I'm building. one designed for people who've been left out of every other one. He paused. This isn't about charity. This is about change. And I don't want yes people. I want people who challenge the room, just by being in it. Kendra felt the air shift. A part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab the opportunity and run. But another part, older, more guarded, hesitated. She had missed a job interview, watched her dream slip through a set of closed corporate doors, and now this. It all felt too sudden, too generous. She straightened slightly. I appreciate that, Mr. O'Neill. I really do. But I need to know I earned it. That I wasn't just picked because I made a good story. Shaq smiled gently. Fair. He reached into the folder beside him and slid a thin stack of papers across the table. One shadow project. 3 weeks. Real deliverables. Real accountability. You prove what I already know. Or you walk away, knowing you didn't let anyone hand you your worth. Kendra took the papers, glanced over the first page. The project was no small thing. A strategy revamp for an upcoming initiative aimed at diversifying mid-level management in a Fortune 500 company. Shaq had partial equity in. This wasn't just a test. It was a firewalk. She nodded. All right, let's work. From that moment, she was in the building, but not yet in the room. The next day, she met the team. A blend of consultants, former executives, and rising stars. All sharp, all polished, but not all welcoming. They smiled, but the air had sharp edges. There was no overt rudeness, just the kind of cold professionalism that made someone feel like they were tolerated, not trusted. One of the senior strategists, a woman named Delaney, offered a tight handshake and a tone wrapped in velvet, but loaded with challenge. You're the young woman from the brunch, right? The post that went viral? Kendra nodded. Delaney's smile didn't waver. Well, let's see if you can go viral in a spreadsheet too. The laughter from a few nearby was quiet, but unmistakable. Kendra didn't flinch. She'd heard worse in friendlier packaging. She spent the first week listening more than speaking. Shadowing meetings, studying data, taking notes like her life depended on it. She was expected to deliver a presentation at the end of her 3 weeks. Something strategic, meaningful, and implementable. But the deeper she dug, the more something began to itch at the back of her mind. The hiring funnel she'd once entered for that missed job. It came up again, not directly but through internal documentation. Part of the same corporation tied to this leadership initiative. And what she saw there didn't sit right. Candidate scorecards with handwritten notes like not quite the cultural fit next to applicants with clearly strong credentials. Interview debriefs where hiring managers defaulted to gut feeling over objective skill metrics. And most jarring, an internal review committee where not a single person came from a background outside elite university pipelines. Kendra traced the breadcrumbs. Her own application had been marked screened out early. No interview ever scheduled. Despite her qualifications, despite references. She sat with that for a long time. Then decided she wasn't going to bury it. Week 2. She asked for 5 minutes during a project check-in. The room went quiet when she stood beside the digital whiteboard. I was told to find cracks, she began. I found a pattern instead. She showed the hiring pathway for mid-level managers, then overlaid demographic data, then anonymous candidate feedback. No accusations, just facts. She spoke clearly, without emotion, without apology. These systems don't say no with slurs or slams. They say no by default. They say no by forgetting you before you even apply. Some people in the room looked uncomfortable. A few looked annoyed. Delaney leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. And what exactly do you propose we do? Rewrite hiring around emotion? Kendra didn't miss a beat. No, rewrite it around evidence, around what leadership actually requires, not where someone went to school or who they golf with. She clicked to the final slide. Her proposal, an anonymous skills-first hiring initiative. AI-backed, bias-flagged, human-audited. She let the silence settle after that. It stretched long. Then Shaq, who'd sat in the back quietly all along, stood. I think we found our voice, he said simply. The meeting ended not with applause but with movement. That night, Kendra stayed late, worked the analytics again, built mock-ups, drafted the rollout timeline. She didn't feel like she was chasing a second chance anymore. She felt like she was building the first real one she'd ever had. And this time, no one could deny she'd earned the room she was in. He leaned forward in his chair, arms resting across his thighs, expression open but direct. This wasn't the big Shaq from TV commercials or basketball lore. This was the quiet architect of rooms most people never knew existed. "I'm not offering you a handout, Kendra," he said. "I'm offering you a seat at a table I'm building. One designed for people who've been left out of every other one." He paused. "This isn't about charity. This is about change. And I don't want yes people. I want people who challenge the room just by being in it." Kendra felt the air shift. A part of her wanted to say yes, immediately, to grab the opportunity and run. But another part, older, more guarded, hesitated. She had missed a job interview, watched her dreams slip through a set of closed corporate doors, and now this. It all felt too sudden, too generous. She straightened slightly. "I appreciate that, Mr. O'Neill. I really do, but I need to know I earned it. That I wasn't just picked because I made a good story." Shaq smiled gently. "Fair." He reached into the folder beside him and slid a thin stack of papers across the table. "One shadow project, 3 weeks. Real deliverables, real accountability. You prove what I already know, or you walk away, knowing you didn't let anyone hand you your worth." Kendra took the papers, glanced over the first page. The project was no small thing. A strategy revamp for an upcoming initiative aimed at diversifying mid-level management in a Fortune 500 company Shaq had partial equity in. This wasn't just a test, it was a firewalk. She nodded. "All right, let's work." From that moment, she was in the building, but not yet in the room. The next day she met the team, a blend of consultants, former executives, and rising stars. All sharp, all polished, but not all welcoming. They smiled, but the air had sharp edges. There was no overt rudeness, just the kind of cold professionalism that made someone feel like they were tolerated, not trusted. One of the senior strategists, a woman named Delaney, offered a tight handshake and a tone wrapped in velvet but loaded with challenge. "You're the young woman from the brunch, right? The post that went viral?" Kendra nodded. Delaney's smile didn't waver. "Well, let's see if you can go viral in a spreadsheet too." The laughter from a few nearby was quiet, but unmistakable. Kendra didn't flinch. She'd heard worse in friendlier packaging. She spent the first week listening more than speaking, shadowing meetings, studying data, taking notes like her life depended on it. She was expected to deliver a presentation at the end of her 3 weeks, something strategic, meaningful, and implementable. But the deeper she dug, the more something began to itch at the back of her mind. The hiring funnel she'd once entered for that missed job. It came up again. Not directly, but through internal documentation. Part of the same corporation tied to this leadership initiative. And what she saw there didn't sit right. Candidate scorecards, with handwritten notes like not quite the cultural fit next to applicants with clearly strong credentials. Interview debriefs, where hiring managers defaulted to gut feeling over objective skill metrics. And most jarring, an internal review committee, where not a single person came from a background outside elite university pipelines. Kendra traced the breadcrumbs. Her own application had been marked screened out early. No interview ever scheduled. Despite her qualifications, despite references, she sat with that for a long time, then decided she wasn't going to bury it. Week 2, she asked for 5 minutes during a project check-in. The room went quiet when she stood beside the digital whiteboard. "I was told to find cracks," she began. "I found a pattern instead." She showed the hiring pathway for mid-level managers, then overlaid demographic data, then anonymous candidate feedback. No accusations. Just facts. She spoke clearly, without emotion, without apology. These systems don't say no with slurs or slams. They say no by default. They say no by forgetting you before you even apply. Some people in the room looked uncomfortable. A few looked annoyed. Delaney leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "And what exactly do you propose we do? Rewrite hiring around emotion?" Kendra didn't miss a beat. "No. Rewrite it around evidence, around what leadership actually requires, not where someone went to school or who they golf with." She clicked to the final slide, her proposal. An anonymous, skills-first hiring initiative. AI-backed, bias-flagged, human audit. She let the silence settle after that. It stretched long. Then Shaq, who'd sat in the back quietly all along, stood. "I think we found our voice," he said simply. The meeting ended, not with applause, but with movement. That night, Kendra stayed late, worked the analytics again, built mock-ups, drafted the rollout timeline. She didn't feel like she was chasing a second chance anymore. She felt like she was building the first real one she'd ever had. And this time, no one could deny she'd earned the room she was in. The third week opened with a kind of silence Kendra hadn't experienced before. Not the cold dismissal of being ignored, or the stillness of being overlooked. This was something else. Anticipation humming beneath polished floors and panoramic windows. A quiet acknowledgement that something unexpected was forming in the walls of that office space. Kendra stood at her desk in a private workspace. Shaq's team had assigned her. Her laptop screen glowed with layers of code, sketches, diagrams, and workflows she'd built from scratch. Beside it sat a legal pad, filled with sharp, handwritten notes, terms like implicit gatekeeping, empathy gaps, and real-time value interpretation. What she was building wasn't pretty. It wasn't clean-cut or corporate-approved, but it was real. Her model combined live behavioral analysis with candidate metadata, assessing not just credentials or resumes, but emotional intelligence, adaptability, and situational empathy, traits often lost in conventional hiring algorithms. The interface allowed employers to filter by hard skill sets, but then prompted reflection through anonymized cultural fit assessments and bias interrupt alerts. It challenged the idea that culture was just about comfort. Kendra had titled it Core Character Over Resume Evaluation. She didn't build it to go viral. She built it because the silence she felt the day she missed her interview still sat somewhere in her bones. If systems had memory, they also needed accountability. And this was her answer. The morning of the presentation arrived, without ceremony, no announcement, no welcome slide, just Kendra walking into the conference room with her shoulders squared and a slim black drive in her hand. Shaq was already seated, dressed sharp in slate gray, nodding at her with quiet pride. The rest of the room was a mix of executives, analysts, and the original advisory team, Delaney included, her expression unreadable. Kendra connected her drive. The projector whirred to life. "I'm not here to convince you," she said plainly. "I'm here because I got tired of asking for doors that were never built for people like me." A beat. She clicked the first slide. "This isn't about lowering standards. This is about measuring the right ones." She walked them through Core step by step. Demonstrated how the platform identified repeated linguistic bias in job descriptions, flagged gut feeling notes that historically correlated with biased decisions, and layered in a transparent scoring system based on real-world team cohesion metrics. "It's not just who you hire," she added. "It's who they're allowed to become once they walk through your doors." The room stayed quiet, not bored, focused. When she showed them a case study she'd run quietly in the background, an anonymized version of her own original rejection from that major firm, cross-referenced with comparable candidate data, several people shifted in their chairs. Then she dropped the final slide, a simple line of code, glowing white on black. It read, "Access is not empathy. Empathy is how you design access." She turned off the projector, folded her hands in front of her. "That's Core. I'm not asking you to use it. I'm daring you to prove you don't need it." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was stunned. Delaney leaned forward, but said nothing. The man beside her, a senior systems exec, who hadn't said a word during previous meetings, cleared his throat. "How long did this take to build?" Kendra looked at him directly. 12 years of being overlooked. 3 weeks of not waiting anymore. The room stayed still. Then Shaq stood. He didn't clap. He didn't shout. He simply said, This is what I built this team for." He walked to the front of the room, placed a single hand on Kendra's shoulder. "Core doesn't just fix a flaw," he said, turning to the room. "It exposes the ones we've stopped seeing. This is leadership. This is legacy work. And we either get behind it now, or get left behind by it later." He turned back to Kendra. "You didn't ask for a seat," he said. "You built the table." Later that afternoon, the news reached her through a soft chime on her phone. An email from the original company, the one she'd missed her interview with. Subject: Core licensing inquiry. They'd seen the prototype. A consultant in the room that day had quietly shared it. They wanted to meet. Wanted to discuss implementation. Budget already pre-approved. Kendra read the message twice, then leaned back, letting the words sink in. She wasn't angry. She wasn't vindicated. She was something deeper. Resolved. She drafted a simple reply. "Happy to meet. But understand, Core wasn't made to help you recruit better. It was made to make sure people like me don't get erased again. That stays non-negotiable. She hit send. Then she stood, walked back toward the window, and let herself look out. Not because she was dreaming anymore, but because she had just proved she could design reality instead. Kendra Hollis sat exactly where she had that morning, weeks ago, when her shoes were scuffed from running and her breath carried the weight of expectation and hope. But today she wasn't rushing. She wasn't waiting either. She was just being. The spot felt smaller than she remembered, not because the space had changed, but because she had. Her posture carried a quiet ownership now, not arrogance, not ease, but the kind of peace that comes when you've seen the inside of a storm and walked out dry. She watched the city with new eyes, not the desperate gaze of someone looking for an open door, but the steady gaze of someone who had decided she'd build her own. A kid on a scooter rolled past. A woman with 2 grocery bags paused to rest on the opposite end of the bench. Traffic murmured behind her like a song she no longer had to chase. Kendra let it all flow around her, letting the world do what it did, while she simply stayed still enough to feel present. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, expecting another press inquiry or calendar ping from Shaq's advisory team. Instead, it was a text, just a name at the top, Lucille O'Neill. The message was short. You remind me of someone I raised. Thank you for standing when it would have been easier to sit down. Keep building. Kendra didn't smile, not immediately, but something in her chest did shift. A warmth, a knowing. The kind of recognition that couldn't be bought or branded. She typed a reply, paused, then deleted it. Some moments didn't need a response. They just needed remembrance. Across the city, in a sun-drenched atrium, filled with investors, community leaders, and media personnel, a podium stood beneath a bold new banner. The Hollis Initiative, a grant-based accelerator for vision-driven founders from underrepresented communities. Shaq stood at the mic, not with a basketball in hand or a sponsorship to pitch, but as a mentor, a man who had seen what power could become when you handed it back instead of holding it tight. He looked out across the audience and said, "This isn't about second chances. This is about first belief. Some of us never had the luxury of being underestimated. We were just ignored. Until we weren't." He motioned toward the banner behind him. This program exists because one woman missed her interview and showed us how leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like showing up when no one's watching. Sometimes it looks like holding the hand of someone society steps over. Cameras clicked. Applause followed. But Shaq wasn't looking for noise. He was thinking of that day. Kendra showed up at the brunch. That look in her eyes. Not gratitude, not awe, just focus. Like she'd already decided she belonged, and the room needed to catch up. The first round of fellows would be announced next month. They'd receive funding, mentorship, and something even more rare, permission to be themselves while building something bigger than themselves. Back at the bus stop, Kendra stood slowly. A breeze tugged at her coat. She looked across the street, not toward some glittering tower or executive building, but toward the horizon. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not out of uncertainty, but clarity. The woman beside her asked, "Waiting on someone?" Kendra shook her head gently. "Nah, just watching it all change." She turned, walked down the sidewalk, her shadow stretching long behind her. Her phone buzzed once more, this time from the accelerator's internal system. A welcome message for the incoming advisory co-chair. Her name listed first. No asterisk. No footnote. Just that. A group of teenagers passed by, talking about a podcast they'd heard where Shaquille O'Neal mentioned a young woman who made the whole room rethink what power looks like. One of the teens asked, "Y'all think that was real?" Another replied, "Don't matter. It moved him. That's real enough." Kendra smiled as their voices faded behind her, because now she understood something deeper than validation or revenge. She hadn't missed her shot. She'd rerouted the whole court. And with every step she took down that cracked sidewalk, a new legacy followed. "The day I missed my shot," she whispered under her breath, almost like a prayer, "was the day I became something bigger than what I was chasing." What would you choose if no one was watching? If this story stirred something in you, a reminder, a challenge, a mirror, then maybe you're not just here to witness change. Maybe you're here to be it. Keep showing up where it matters. The right eyes always find you. And when they do, be ready to build the table, not just wait for a seat.